Welcome to Encounter, where we celebrate putting faith into action and community leaders who live out compassion, grace, and love. We're a program of the Broome County Council of Churches that addresses food insecurity through CHOW and the Greater Good Grocery, provides hospital and jail ministry, builds wheelchair ramps, and assists neighbors with transportation and shopping services through Faith in Action volunteers. We invite you to the conversation. Encounter your neighbors as we learn to walk together in love and kindness.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack. I'm the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches. One of the things that we get to do on Encounter is highlight organizations in our area that are making a difference in the work that they do for our community. One of those organizations is the Broome County Library. Broome County Library is located over on Main Street in Binghamton, not too far from the Broome County Council of Churches office. We often will even have our Greater Good grocery bus inside of their parking lot. To help us figure out some of the things that are going on with the library and some of the programs that they offer is the Executive Director. His name is Josias Bartram. Josias, welcome to Encounter.
Thank you. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning.
Wonderful to be here.
Yeah. So how does one become a librarian? I mean, you are a librarian, right?
I am a librarian. In general, library administration is one of those professions where you get there by working in the trenches in the profession first, and then go into administration. So just from a purely credential standpoint, it requires a master's degree in library science, which I have from Syracuse. Go Orange.
Go Orange. There you go.
But I think beyond that, librarians, I feel like it's one of the professions where I see one of the strongest clear identities around the profession. So I think in addition to just the credentials, it draws people who kind of grew up in libraries themselves, who are very comfortable in that kind of environment. So sort of self-directed learners, people with a community focus, kind of often a tech focus, but not enough so that they want to really go into technology. And it's kind of its own, librarians are kind of our own breed, I think.
So how has library science or the whole aspect of libraries, how has that changed since you became a librarian? I don't know how long you've been doing this job. A lot of
the first round of the biggest changes happened right before I started. So I graduated I got my master's in 2012. So at that point, computers were already widely integrated into libraries. That was kind of the first big change of the modern era, I guess. But we've really seen another one. And I think like a lot of our institutions, COVID was a big change point. Right. So first, libraries had to figure out how to run a lot of operations, either remotely or in ways that allowed for social distancing. But then as things have reopened, there's been much more of a renewed focus on the public space aspect of libraries and what we bring just by being an open public space. And so that's, I think that's the biggest change that I've seen, along with all of the ongoing transition to more electronic resources and ebooks and the like.
So Josias, let me back up just a little bit. So tell us how long you've been at the library here, and maybe a little bit of your background with libraries, like leading up to this.
Sure. So I moved to Binghamton for the job in September 2020. So kind of close to peak COVID. And I was before that I was living in Los Angeles and working in Malibu, California at Pepperdine University. So this was a big transition in a lot of ways. I had the experience of driving across the country during, where each state had different lockdown rules going on, and I tend to sort of be a rule follower, so I think a lot of people didn't necessarily follow the letter of the rules with the various lockdown stuff, but when I got to New York, I social distanced for 2 weeks, which was the protocol at the time. So in terms of my career, I've worked, often librarians will focus on academic librarianship, public libraries, or special libraries, which is more of either like museums or corporations hire librarians. I've kind of done all of it. I've taken the opportunities as they've arisen, and I think, I'm someone who likes a lot of variety, and so I've worked in public libraries, university libraries, and museum libraries in New York, Delaware, and California.
Well, there you go. That's have you seen differences between how each state's approach libraries?
Yeah, there are some differences. New York, of course, has quite the bureaucracy, as we all know.
Right.
But going with that, there is a lot of support for libraries in New York. And there's a lot of support for small rural libraries that serve as these community hubs. Like here we see it. Our library is part of the 4-county library system, which includes Delaware County. And all across Delaware County, there's these libraries that are kind of the real community core of these small towns, and that's a very New York approach to libraries that I really appreciate.
Well, very cool. So let's talk a little bit about what you have going on in the Broome County Library now. So we've talked a little bit about your background, and in there you said that that libraries here in New York, or at least across the country, maybe even, are considered public spaces. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so that's a across the country thing for public libraries, but it doesn't necessarily exist in other countries, and it isn't widespread in European countries, for instance, which is interesting to realize. But we have, dating back to the founding fathers in this country, we have this idea of free libraries as a community space. So the fact that the membership is free and open to everyone is a big part of that. But the space itself also is. So going back decades, libraries, especially kind of in urban cores, like where BCPL is, have served as spaces for people who need shelter during the day. And you don't have to buy anything to be welcome in a library, other than following our sort of basic code of conduct rules that maintain a safe space. There's really nothing that's expected of people. So if you're someone who needs... Yeah.
Typical.
Yes. Even that has sort of gone by the wayside, I will say.
I know it is.
So we're a space that a lot of people who are struggling with housing, mental illness, and addiction come to just to have somewhere to be during the day. And that's always been the case, but this from your work, it's really picked up in the post-COVID world, and that's an important part of what we do now.
And I think it's important for our listeners and our viewers to know that what we have mostly in Broome County are warming centers for homeless and for other people. That it's not really a full shelter where they actually have places to stay during the course of a day. So they have to be out of the shelter, out of the warming center during the middle of the day. And libraries tend to be the magnet that draws them, because it's especially now. I mean, this winter's you must be hopping, because it's been much colder than previous winters. I think this is the coldest winter we've had in 9 years.
Yep.
So, what kind of services do you offer to that cohort, that section of our community?
Well, the biggest thing right now is we have a peer support program, and peer support is a model where the people offering the services have some kind of lived experience that they can draw on that allows them to understand what people are going through and connect with them. So in this case, our peers are working through Catholic Charities, and they are folks who are have been through the mental health treatment system at Catholic Charities and are in recovery for various mental health diagnoses and in treatment. And that gives them the ability to, it gives them some empathy to draw on, which is so important when working with people in this level of need. And so that's open, right now it's Monday through Thursday, but we're expanding it to Monday through Friday. And this is a program that's been supported by the Clee Foundation, one of our great local foundations, as well as our Friends of the Library nonprofit, which is, it's a little bit like the PTA for the library. So those two groups have done a lot to support us in this. And primarily it's just, like I said, the open, safe space is so important.
Right.
So this is a room specifically for this segment of our population to feel welcome. And there really is a strong community feeling if you go in there during the day when people are there. I think sometimes those of us who haven't experienced homelessness can underestimate the extent to which it can feel like any other community of neighbors. And so this really draws on and brings out that part. But then through this, there's services available. So the peers are able to do outreach to a variety of services and get people connected. So that's been a very successful program that we're going to model. Going forward, a lot of what we do will be modeled after this.
And I know that you've also partnered with Chow in you want to talk a little bit about that too? Sure.
So you mentioned having the Greater Good grocery bus in the parking lot, and that's been a piece of what we're doing as far as food goes. We also, when our Friends of the Library group that I mentioned a second ago, they conduct book sales at the library
right.
to raise funds for our library programs, but they also raise funds for Chow as part of that. We also we often have the Chow donation barrels, so if anyone's looking for a place to drop food donations off, the library is a good place for that. And more recently, we have a produce cooler next to our circulation desk, which has been one of our more experimental but successful programs. And the produce cooler it's not need-based, unlike a lot of what Chow does or what food pantries do. It's really for everyone. And we encourage everyone to take produce from it because it creates more of a sense of community as opposed to a need-based service. And so that's a lot of produce that we purchase from local farms, but also that we get from Chow. Chow will often have a large quantity of produce that needs to be placed quickly, and so we're often the beneficiaries of that.
Just to let everyone know, Chow is not typically need-based. Anyone can really access any of Chow's programs without having a being under a certain economic threshold. We do through Chow. It's interesting. The majority, a lot of the people that actually go to Chow are people that work, and they just have that one thing that happens. We all know what that one thing typically is, like, the car goes out, the medicine needs to be bought, or there's a number of things that kind of become that one thing, and that one thing puts them over the edge, and those folks are free to go to Chow. We don't have any thresholds that people have to do, but I understand what you're saying. It's open for everyone, and you want to make sure that you have produce for everyone too. So it's a good time to check out what an eggplant tastes like, right?
And we do have, because we are library still, information is part of what we're doing in education. So, sometimes eggplants are one thing, but sometimes it's something like kohlrabi or local produce that is unusual to people. So we combine it with information about what these foods are and how to prepare them. And one of the most wonderful parts there's just so many happy stories with the produce cooler. It's one of the points of joy for me. But it's on the way to the kids area. So in the summer, we have a lot of the kids trained to just go to the fridge and help themselves. Kids are wonderful because they certainly have some preconceptions and prejudices about food, but they're very different from adults. So they'll happily try certain things, or some kids just love carrots or whatever it is, and that's very heartwarming to watch.
So my guest today is Josias Bartram, and we've been talking about the Broome County Library and his work there, and it seems to me, as you're describing the what's going on at the library, that you're expanding what a librarian is. It's more than just being concerned about books or information or technology. It's being concerned about a community, and a community. The way that you're describing it is very similar to how many might operate around churches. The church is less just about one thing. It's multiple things that kind of go into it. So that typically hasn't been the case, but it's increasingly becoming the case with libraries, right?
That's correct, definitely. Just like community spaces primarily first and foremost. I don't want to, we're still, a significant portion of our budget goes towards books for the community still. Right. A lot of our patrons are there to check out books to read or to do a story time program. So a lot of the traditional services are still there, but there's become such a need in our society for these open public forum type spaces, and especially where all opinions and ideologies are welcome, but within a framework that maintains safety and welcomeness for everyone. And libraries have really excelled at that and have been able to step into a need in the community. And it looks a little bit different in small rural communities versus small cities versus big cities, but it's still there's an ethos to what the profession is offering and what the space is offering. And of course, this is all public money, public resources that are going into this. So I think a piece of it has been to think about how do we best spend public money to really support the community with what it needs.
Yeah, and it so as far as the technology and the books are concerned, one of the things that I've found interesting, especially this was starting to come online even before COVID, was the prevalence of ebooks.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about how that works with the library?
Sure. So I think a lot of people who read ebooks are familiar with purchasing them through Amazon or something like that, but you can check them out for free through the library. So if you have a library card, it gives you the ability to reserve through an online platform, reserve ebooks and have them delivered directly to your phone. So we do have, I've talked about the importance of the public space, but we actually have folks who rarely come into the library because what they're primarily doing is using these free resources. So it's kind of been like equally important parallel tracks with libraries.
Right.
With, of course, figuring out how to do it with approximately the same amount of funding to cover more things, which is the nature of government. But yeah, providing those ebooks is part of what we do. I think, probably 5 to 10 years ago, there was this idea that ebooks might replace physical paper books. Mm-hmm. I have to say that seems very unlikely to me at this point. There's a lot of advantages to being able to bring an ebook or any audio book with you on a plane, for instance, where you don't have to carry around the physical object. But many of us, myself included, and I see it with a lot of Gen Z and younger folks even, that the importance of the physical object of the book is not really diminishing for people. So ebooks are more complementary to that than replacing it.
Right, because you can lend it, or the physical book itself, you can mark it up and you can do all kinds of stuff that you can't take notes in or write thoughts down, that you can't necessarily do with the technology is trying to keep up with that, right? So at some point we may have but then you would have to actually buy the book and buy the ebook than have it come from a library, right?
Yeah. Yep. So there is, like note-taking technology and stuff is always being tried out, but on a more fundamental level, people process information quite differently on a screen. And there's been a lot of work to make e-readers that give the illusion of paper, but they don't smell like paper. They don't have the tactile element. And I mean, I even find this when I'm doing office work, I will take different kinds of notes on a computer versus what I write on paper, because it just communicates with a different part of my brain. So I think it's definitely, we're looking at a both and model with these. There's there's another complication for us with ebooks. So a physical book, if we buy that for the library, we own that object and all rights to lend it, and that's been established in U.S. copyright law for a very long time. Ebooks are not treated that way. They're technically software, so we're paying for the right to license it to people, which means that the prices that libraries pay can be dictated by the publishers, and the whole power dynamic is very different with ebooks.
Is that one of the reasons why you end up with a long waiting list on ebooks for various books, because you can only afford maybe 1 or 2 copies, whereas if you have the actual physical book, you can have more?
Yep. Again, because the terms can it's a contract, so the terms can be kind of dictated by either the publishers or the companies that are providing this service. So we have to treat it as if it was so each license we treat as if it was one object, so people have to wait for those licenses to become available. We have put a lot more money into ebook. We're working with the 4-county library system to spend quite a bit more on ebooks over the next 2 to 3 years. So I'm hoping for anyone who's experienced those wait times, which have been pretty bad, I'm hoping that's going to improve as we are able to purchase more. But
collectively, you can probably do more than one can do by themselves, right?
Yep. So this is in library world, this is called a consortium. So I think, like education, we have lots of jargon, but it's basically just we work together. We have more purchasing power as a system of all these libraries working together, and often actually. So I would recommend to people to also get cards through NYPL, the New York Public Library.
Yep, I do.
Yep, because they're getting ebooks on behalf of the entire state. So anyone who lives in New York is eligible for that ebook card. And they have, again, much more collective purchasing power just because it's a larger organization.
Yeah, and even there, I mean, sometimes I'll end up being on a wait list that's up to can be up to 3 months.
Yep.
Yeah. So you partner with a lot of different aspects of the community, it sounds like, too. So you have like Catholic Charities, you have CHOW, you have a lot of mental health professionals and other folks that are all a part of what goes on at the library. Are there any other partnerships that you want to highlight?
Sure. I think I'll just say first, partnerships are how work gets done. I think in every community, but really in this community. Very often staffing is what, the choke point for getting things accomplished in this area is often not having enough people to do it. And so working together is how we kind of maximize our ability to do that. So it's such a collaborative community, and that's something I've really loved integrating into. But yeah, I'll highlight a couple other partnerships as well. So we're working with ACBC, the Addiction Center of Broome County, to distribute Narcan, which is, I think, in some ways a miracle drug, I'll just say. Overdoses have been such an epidemic in this community over the past few years. And Narcan is capable of just immediately reversing an overdose. So somebody who is very close to death can be kind of miraculously brought back from that point. So our goal with this is just to make sure that this incredible life-saving drug is as widely distributed throughout the community as possible. So we encourage anyone who, works in a context in which they might run into somebody who's overdosing or is present in parts of the community where they might just stumble upon that, to carry Narcan. It's very easy to use, and it has the potential, it already is, there's starting to be the data to back this up, that this is, there's still more work to be done, but some progress is being made in this epidemic. So that's been really important work that we do. We work with the Broome County Public Defender's office to distribute period products through the library. This has been another real issue in our community, is access to feminine hygiene products.
Yeah.
There's such, I can tell you, there's such demand. We see huge quantities being needed by the community. So that's another really good one. But in general, when we look to do work that goes beyond the scope of traditional library services, it's almost always going to be through a partnership, because what we really have to offer is the space where a lot of people already come. But librarians are generalists, so we don't necessarily have the specific knowledge to run these programs. And instead, we're providing the resources and the space. Yeah.
Exactly. So as we're winding down in the last minute, do you want to talk about how important libraries are to our community?
Yes, I would love it. This is my favorite topic, as you might not be surprised to hear. Again, I think that just this whole idea of public space, it's something that, if you look at our society 50 years ago, there were a lot more spaces like this. And we've created a poverty of spaces in which people can gather together in community, which is leading to isolation and to loneliness and a lot of ills that we see. And you compared it to churches, which I think is an excellent parallel. Spaces where people gather in community and together to accomplish things. And that's just so important at this point, especially post-COVID. A lot of these issues have only gotten worse as people try to figure out how to come out of isolation. And so that in itself is really important. And then along with that, the ability to provide these resources to everyone for free through the community. We've become a society that's very focused on purchasing everything, I'll say, commercialism.
That is true.
So again, I think this is another sort of parallel with your work and with churches, to step back a little bit from that consumerism and to think about what it means to provide things for free to each other.
My guest today has been Josias Bartram, and I want to ask